Well, hello again. It's great to be back with you once more. Our passage for this week is from chapter 6 of the Gospel of Luke, and we'll be looking specifically at 12 verses from 27 to 38. This is a very famous passage, which in many ways mirrors some of the themes and ideas from the even more famous Sermon on the Mount, found in Matthew's Gospel, chapters 5, 6, and 7. Verse 17 of Luke 6 tells us that Jesus and his 12 newly designated apostles came down from the mountain and stood on a level place preaching to a great number of people who had come from all over to hear from him. For this reason, it is often called the Sermon on the Plain. But before we get into some of those ideas, I would like to begin with a single verse from our passage, Luke 6, verse 31. Do to others as you would have them do to you. This verse, together with its near identical sister in Matthew 7, verse 12, have had such a profound impact on the world that they have been given a name. It's a catchy name, the Golden Rule. Here they are both together. Luke 6:31, do to others as you would have them do to you. And Matthew 7:12, so in everything do to others what you would have them do to you. Now the brainy ones among you may have even spotted that I've used this phrase as the title of today's message. This term, the Golden Rule, has long been used in Christian circles, but it has also been used in slightly different forms by many other religions, faiths, and philosophies. For example, this slide shows how it is described in many of the world's major religions. In fact, Simon Blackburn, the English academic philosopher, said that the Golden Rule can be found in some form in almost every ethical tradition. And there is even a poster on permanent display at the headquarters of the United Nations, which shows that the principles enshrined in the Golden Rule resonate with each of all 13 faith groups. Many books and articles have been written about the Golden Rule, and there are whole websites devoted to the topic. But as fascinating as it is, if we read the verses that surround it, and all we notice is the Golden Rule, we are missing the broader meaning of the text. So let's not take it out of context. Let's go back to our original passage and read through it from beginning to end. Luke chapter 6, verses 27 to 28. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. And there's our Golden Rule again. Many years ago, when the author Mark Twain was alive, somebody asked him, as a Christian, don't you have a problem with all those bits of the Bible that you don't understand? Mark Twain didn't miss a beat. He replied immediately, it's not the bits I don't understand that are the problem, he said. It's the ones that I do understand. And there's a lot of truth in that. This passage in Luke is not difficult to understand, well, most of it anyway, but it is very difficult to live out in our daily lives. And when you listen to the words of Jesus here, a lot of what he is saying seems to go beyond the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is a bare minimum. What Jesus seems to be saying here is not just do to others what you would want them to do to you, but do even more for them than you would want them to do for you. Don't just passively accept it when someone hates you. Don't just take it on the chin when someone abuses you. Don't just suck it up when something that is precious to you is damaged or stolen. Those things are hard enough to do, but Jesus asks for more. He says, go further. Resist the usual human way of expecting something back from your so-called good behavior. Go out of your way to love your enemies. Actively bless those who badmouth and slander you. Make sure you pray for the people who treat you badly. Let's continue in verse 32. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. You see, anyone can love those who love them, do good to those who are good to us, lend to those who will pay us back. Even sinners do that, says Jesus. But what credit is that to you? The Greek word translated into the English credit here is charis. Charis actually means grace. In other words, Jesus is saying, where's the grace in that? The whole world does that, but I made you to be better than that. Let's finish reading the passage in verses 35 to 38. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Okay, so we've had a quick skim through these remarkable verses. Now let us go back through the passage and see what else we can glean. To keep it simple, I'm going to group it into 4 main points. And the first one, point 1, is this: listen to Jesus. Listen to Jesus. Jesus begins this passage by asking his audience to listen up. Luke 6:27 says, "But to you who are listening, I say." This is such a short, but such a so important point. Verse 17 of Luke 6 tells us that Jesus wasn't just talking to his newly designated apostles, Simon, Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot. He wasn't just talking to them. There was also a large crowd of his wider disciples, those who followed Jesus wherever he went, wherever he spoke. And in addition to that, there was a great crowd of people who came from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, and from the coastal region around Tyre and Sidon. I'm sure all of them were listening. They all went to listen. Many had come for healing or to have their demons cast out. But Jesus says, "But to you who are listening, I say." He says, listen up, people. I want all of you to listen, but I know that some of you are not listening. That is as true today as it was back then. Okay, when we read the Bible, we're not literally listening to the voice of Jesus, but the principle is the same. Some who read these words are not hearing them. Many who read these words are not listening. These are hard words to hear, and they're even harder to do. But I want you to listen. I need you to listen. So let us listen. Point 2. Love your enemies. In many ways, this is the biggest point of these verses. Love your enemies. Luke 6:27 to 29. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. We'll come back to those later verses in a little while, but first of all, let's concentrate on this, one of the hardest commands in the whole Bible. Love your enemies. Whoever heard of such a thing? No wonder he warned them to listen up. One of the most quoted commands from the Bible, and I would imagine one of the least obeyed. So who are our enemies? For a Christian, an enemy is not someone who you hate or who you want to harm. An enemy is someone who is hostile to you, someone who wants to harm you, take revenge on you, or even destroy you. How do we, Christians, deal with those people? Well, not by taking revenge on them and not by destroying them. How about stopping and thinking for a moment about how we can help them? What about trying to understand what is causing them to act the way they are acting? To start to care for them and learn how to love them. Love your enemies. How do we love a person who hates us, who abuses us, who tries to destroy us? Well, the second part of verse 27 gives us a good steer. It says, do good to those who hate you. Jesus uses the word love here as an active verb, not a wishy-washy emotional feeling. He commands us to do good to our enemies, whether we feel like it or not. To put Jesus' teaching into effect is to see things his way. Jesus, the Son of God, himself divine, he showers grace on all people. And these verses show us how. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Don't say a prayer that the earth will open and swallow them up. Pray nice prayers for them, good prayers for good things for them. The second half of this passage is truly difficult for us to figure out. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Is Jesus really teaching that we should remain passive when we're in abusive situations? Just lie down and take it? That is not what he is instructing us here. To turn the other cheek means to turn the tables on those who seek to harm us by using non-violent resistance. That's quite a difficult concept, isn't it? Let me try to explain. Jesus is talking about a backhanded slap to your right cheek. Someone is standing in front of you. Most people are right-handed. If they were going to slap you on the cheek, they would do it with their right hand, and that would be a slap to your right cheek. And in Jesus' time, that was considered the worst public affront to a person's dignity. So Jesus' advice was to turn the other cheek. which would be the left cheek. And in doing that, you would challenge the aggressor to strike again. But this time, they would have to hit you with the palm of their hand. In Jesus' time, slapping someone with the palm of your hand was something that only a person of equal status could do. Therefore, in this example, the aggressor would be forced to withdraw or publicly acknowledge that your status was equal to his. Don't hit back. Instead, break the cycle of hate and hurt. Now, I want to thank Professor Craig Keener for explaining that concept in his really good book about the historical context of the Gospels. And what about the second part of this verse? If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Again, thinking about Jesus' time, if someone demanded your coat as collateral for a loan, if that was all you had to offer, Jewish law demanded that it had to be returned by nightfall, as the person would need it to keep warm. You would need it to keep warm. But to also give them your shirt would leave you in an extremely vulnerable position. You might be completely naked. You certainly would be subject to the vagaries of the element. And then your opponent would be publicly shamed. There is so much wisdom in these words of Jesus, but much of it is lost because we cannot understand the context. It's alien to our current context, our current way of life. And again, thanks to Professor Keene for his explanation. Now, the other place in our passage where we find Jesus' command to love our enemies is in Luke 6 and verse 35. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Once again, Jesus emphasizes the importance of love in action. We may not feel like loving our enemies, but our actions show love to our antagonists. And Jesus ends this section with a promise. Our reward will be great, and we will be children of the Most High. Is it possible to love our enemies? Well, personally, I don't believe it is on our own. But with God, all things are possible. And this is Jesus' call, Jesus' challenge to those who listen. He will surely help us with these difficult commands. Moving on now to point 3. Show heavenly mercy. Show heavenly mercy. Why do I say heavenly mercy? Well, it's because of the context of Luke 6 and verse 36. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. This is not talking about human mercy, which, let's be honest, is probably sketchy at best. I'm thinking of a situation, I'm thinking of a scene like that of the Roman Emperor, sitting in his gilded throne as he watches gladiators doing battle. And when one of the gladiators is clearly losing, well, it's up to the mercy of the emperor whether the man will live or die. And he does this by giving a sign. He puts his thumb up and the man lives. And that's where we get that expression, thumbs up, all good. But if he wants the man to die, he puts his thumb down and the man is executed. Human mercy is a bit like that. It's a bit fickle. It's more of a whim than anything else. But here in verse 36, Jesus says, be merciful, just as your Father in heaven is merciful. So this is heavenly mercy. We humans find heavenly mercy a very difficult concept to wrestle with because it's alien to our way of thinking. But our Heavenly Father made it simple for us to understand because He sent His beloved Son to show the world what heavenly mercy is. Heavenly mercy was Jesus living a perfect, sinless life and dying a painful, unjust death so that human beings could be let right off the hook. It's a hook we completely deserve, but the grace, the mercy of our Heavenly Father allows us to get off completely. Jesus' death on the cross is the perfect expression of heavenly mercy. It extends from the good and the great and the worthy, if there are any, to the lowest of the low, and on beyond that, to our very worst enemies. The Franciscan priest and author Richard Rohr calls the cross the victory because it encompasses everyone. Even those who are the opponents of God are included in the salvation of Christ. He writes this: what the mystery of the cross teaches us is how to stand against hate without becoming hate, how to oppose evil without becoming evil ourselves. The goal of non-violence is always winning the true understanding of the supposed opponent, not his or her humiliation or defeat. Wise words. So coming back to verse 37. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. You know, it's ironic that Christians are in many ways more vulnerable to the sins of judging, condemning, and unforgiveness than those who are not yet followers of Jesus. Why is that? It's because the world is broken, and there are broken people everywhere that we look. And it's so easy for us to look at other people's failures and feel better about our own. In these verses, Jesus is inviting us to step away from the way the world does things and join Him in His way of living, to keep our eyes on Him and remember who we are in Him. Instead of focusing on other people and the good and bad decisions they have made, we would do well to remember that. We would do well to remember who we were before we found Jesus. And next time we find ourselves falling into the trap of judging and condemning, we should say to ourselves, there, but for the grace of God, go I. And remind ourselves of the wisdom and truth of Jesus' words, that as we forgive, so we will be forgiven. And let's turn now to my final point, point 4. Give and receive. Give and receive. The passage concludes with Jesus talking about the broad principle of giving. Let's turn to Luke 6 and verse 38. Luke 6 and verse 38. Give, and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Give, and it will be given to you. Jesus hasn't gone off on a tangent here. He is still talking about how his followers should treat their enemies, and this is just another part of that. At this point, some of us might be hearing ourselves thinking, well, I understand the concept of loving my enemies, but why do I have to give to them? verse 35 makes it even worse. It tells us that we should lend to our enemies and not expect to get anything back at all, except that, jumping back to verse 38, here Jesus says that we will get something back. Give, and it will be given to you. Now, I don't know about you, but I think I have always thought that the last part of verse 38, give, and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. I've always thought that that refers to physical blessings. I certainly have listened to many sermons that seem to say that is so. But look again at verse 35. It says, then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High. Surely the emphasis here is leaning more towards a spiritual reward, one in a future time, in the future kingdom of God. In the Gospel of John, Jesus prays a prayer to his disciples. It's a prayer of comfort. John 14 verse 27 tells us, I do not give to you as the world gives. See, God's thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. So maybe the good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, goes deeper than mere physical blessings. Maybe it's talking about them too. But I think he is mainly referring to eternal, heavenly blessings. Eternal blessings. That's what loving your enemies gets you. Isn't that wonderful? Well, in conclusion, today's passage in Luke chapter 6 shows us that God's love flowing through us and through to others goes beyond the golden rule all the way to the kingdom of God. As Tom Wright says in his commentary on Luke's Gospel, and there are too many words here for me to put it up on a slide, he says the kingdom that Jesus preached and lived was all about a glorious, uproarious, absurd generosity. Think of the best thing you can do for the worst person and go ahead and do it. Think of what you'd really like someone to do for you and do it for them. Think of the people to whom you are tempted to be nasty to and lavish generosity on them instead. These instructions have a fresh, spring-like quality. They are all about new life, bursting out energetically, like flowers growing through concrete and startling everyone with their colour and vigour. But are they possible? Well, yes and no. Jesus' point was not to provide his followers with a new rule book, a list of do's and don'ts that you could tick off one by one and sit back satisfied at the end of a successful moral day. The point was to inculcate and illustrate an attitude of heart, a lightness of spirit in the face of all that the world can throw at you. And at the center of it is the thing that motivates and gives color to the whole. You are to be like this because that is what God is like. God is generous to all people, generous to a fault. He provides good things for all to enjoy, the undeserving as well as the deserving. He is astonishingly merciful. So how can we, his forgiven children, be any less? Only when people discover that this is the sort of God they are dealing with will they have any chance at all, of making this way of life their own. Well, I hope this message today got you thinking a little, and I'd like to suggest that perhaps this week you might consider the way that you express love to others, especially those you love less, or those who seem intent on hurting and hating you. how you can proactively reveal the mercy and the love of God to them. How can you love more, judge and condemn less, forgive, and in turn be forgiven? Please join us this coming Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. for our national prayer meeting on Zoom. And don't forget to come back here next Sunday morning for our weekly message on YouTube. Details for both can be found on our website at www.gracecom.church. And I'd like to finish up by reading a benediction from Ephesians 3, verses 17 to 19. May Christ dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God.